It's 1258. You're in Baghdad, not just any city, the greatest city in the world. 1 million people, streets paved with achievements that make Europe look like it's living in caves. The House of Wisdom holds more books than all of Western Christendom combined. Medicine, mathematics, astronomy, this is where human knowledge lives. Then the Mongols arrive. 6 days later, the Tigris River runs black. Not from sewage, from ink. They're throwing so many books into the river that the water turns black with dissolved ink from burning pages. Then it runs red. 800,000 people, dead, gone. The bodies are piled so high, they're creating dams in the river. And here's the detail that keeps me up at night. They killed every dog, every cat, every living thing. Why the cats? That's not military strategy. That's not even cruelty for cruelty's sake. That's something else entirely. That's a statement. Nothing survives us, not even the things that don't matter. Baghdad's population didn't recover to its 1258 levels until about 100 years ago. Let that sink in. It took 750 years for the city to recover from 6 days of Mongol attention. Now, the Mongols are #1 on this list, but they didn't invent this kind of warfare. They didn't invent this level of terror. They perfected it. Because for 2,000 years before the Mongols, tribe after tribe emerged from the Eurasian steppe like waves from an ocean, each one more terrifying than the last, each one teaching the next how to be more efficient at ending civilizations. And if you think you know which tribe was the worst, stick around. Because the journey to get to those cats in Baghdad is a story of human evolution going in a very different, very dark direction. But before we meet the tribes, smash that subscribe button, because if you love history that feels like science fiction, where the real world is stranger and more terrifying than any fantasy, you're in the right place. Let's start where it all began. Around 500 BC, the ancient world's greatest military power, Assyria, started writing about something new, something that made their blood run cold: the Scythians. Now here's what you need to understand about these people. Everything the Greeks and Romans said about them sounded like propaganda, like fear-mongering. Drinking enemy blood, taking scalps and sewing them together to make cloaks, making literal drinking cups out of human skulls. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote it all down, and for 2,000 years scholars assumed he was lying, exaggerating. You know how travel writers are. Everything's bigger, scarier, more exotic. Then, in the 1940s, Soviet archaeologists started opening tombs on the Russian steppe, and every single thing was true. Picture this. You're a Greek merchant. You've traveled to the steppe to trade. A Scythian chieftain invites you to feast. It's an honor you can't refuse. You sit, the food comes. Mare's milk, mutton, all very strange, but okay. Then your host picks up a drinking cup and passes it to you. It's gorgeous, gold inlay, intricate designs of animals fighting. You take it, thank him. He starts laughing, slaps you on the back. Through a translator, he tells you the story of the cup. This was my brother's rival. He challenged my brother to single combat. My brother took his head, drank his blood, had the skull covered in gold. Now we drink from him every feast. You're holding someone's skull, not a replica, not a symbolic thing, an actual human skull, gold-plated, with wine in it. And everyone at the table is laughing because they all have similar cups. They're passing them around, comparing them, telling stories about whose skull is whose. This one was a coward. This one killed 3 of my cousins before we got him. This isn't a war trophy locked in a vault. This is dinnerware. This is normal to them.
Here's where it gets wild. When archaeologists found these tombs, these burial mounds called kurgans, they found something they didn't expect: ice. The tombs had been constructed in a way that moisture got in right after burial, then froze and stayed frozen for 2,500 years. You know how they find frozen woolly mammoths in Siberia with the hair and skin still intact? That's what these tombs were like. Time capsules in your freezer. They opened one tomb and found the Scythian prince, still there, skin preserved, and covering his arms, his chest, his back, tattoos. Intricate, beautiful tattoos of mythical creatures, a complete artistic record of Scythian culture that would have rotted away anywhere else. In another tomb, they found pouches of marijuana, still there, still identifiable after 2.5 millennia. See, Herodotus wrote about this too. He described something he called vapor baths, said the Scythians would set up small tents, put a brazier in the middle like a little barbecue, throw hemp seeds on it, and sit in the tent. Herodotus thought they were bathing, getting clean from the steam. But then he wrote something interesting. The Scythians howl with pleasure in these vapor baths. They weren't bathing. They were getting absolutely baked, hot-boxing tents 2,500 years ago. And we know this is true because they buried marijuana with their dead, left it burning in the tomb when they sealed it up. But here's the thing that really gets me. The thing that makes me understand these people weren't just brutal. They had a system, a code. Herodotus writes that when a Scythian warrior killed his first enemy in battle, he had to drink the man's blood, not as punishment, as initiation. You weren't really a warrior until you tasted death that intimately. Think about what that does to a young man psychologically. 14, 15 years old, first battle, you kill someone, and then while the body's still warm, you have to drink from it. That's not cruelty. That's ritualized trauma. That's creating a warrior class that has crossed a line the rest of humanity won't cross.
And speaking of things that mess with your head, they found something in these frozen tombs that sounds like it's from a horror movie. When a Scythian king died, they didn't just bury him, they buried his retinue, his servants, his horses. In one tomb, they found 360 horses, 360, ritually slaughtered. But here's the part that haunts me. They took some of these horses, maybe 30 or 40 of them, and they staked them into the ground, vertically, so they looked like they were running like a carousel, a merry-go-round of death. Then they took the king's warriors, who had volunteered for this, by the way, considered it an honor, and they staked them, too, on top of the horses. The stake ran through both of them, man and horse, frozen in eternal gallop. The archaeologist who found this called them spectral riders. Imagine opening that tomb. In the dark, your flashlight catches them. Dozens of skeleton warriors on skeleton horses, stakes running through them, circling their dead king forever. These people weren't just fierce, they were artists of death. Now, all of this, the brutality, the trophies, the rituals, none of it matters without the horse. Before 1000 BC, the Scythians were nobody. The Chinese have records of steppe tribes from that era, just wandering groups of footmen, sometimes annoying, never threatening. Then, the Scythians figured out how to ride horses. Not just sit on them, ride them, become one with them. And suddenly, they're in everyone's chronicles. Suddenly, they're feared across 3 continents. They put their children on horses before they could walk properly. There are descriptions of Scythian toddlers barely able to stand, sitting on horseback. By the time they were 10, they could shoot a bow at full gallop. By the time they were 20, they could shoot birds out of the sky, in flight, from horseback, while moving. 12 arrows per minute, minimum. And this is where the myth of the centaur comes from. The Greeks couldn't process what they were seeing. These weren't men on horses. These were single creatures, half man, half beast, with bows. The centaur wasn't imagination. It was trauma trying to explain reality. If you're sitting there thinking, okay, skull cups and frozen tombs and warrior centaurs, how did anyone survive these people? Hit that like button, because the Scythians, they were just the beginning. The tribes that came after them learned from them, built on them, made them look tame. And we're about to meet them.
The Scythians ruled the western steppe for centuries. They seemed unstoppable. Then, around 200 BC, they started losing ground, not to settled empires, to other nomads. A tribal confederation was pushing west, and the Scythians, these legendary warriors who made drinking cups from skulls, were running. The Sarmatians had arrived. Now, the Sarmatians were similar to the Scythians in many ways. Same horse archery, same brutality, same ability to appear out of nowhere and vanish like smoke. But they had something the Scythians didn't, something that gave them a terrifying advantage. Every settled society had a problem with military manpower. You need farmers to grow food, craftsmen to make things, merchants to trade, scholars to preserve knowledge. So maybe, if you're lucky, 10–15% of your population can be warriors. The steppe tribes didn't have that problem. No farmers, no permanent settlements. Every single male was a warrior from birth. That's already a massive advantage. But imagine if you could double that. Picture a Sarmatian girl. She's 12 years old. She's been riding since she was 4, shooting since she was 6. She's as skilled as any boy her age. But unlike the boys who are already considered warriors, she has a test ahead of her, a requirement. She cannot marry until she kills an enemy in battle. Not wounds, kills. Think about what that means. There's no pretending, no ceremonial gesture. You have to take a life violently, personally, before you're allowed to build one. And here's the part that gets me. Sarmatian legends talk about old women who never married, women who grew old and died alone because they never managed to kill anyone in combat. Imagine being that woman. Every feast, every gathering, everyone knows you're the one who never passed the test, the one who couldn't do it. The shame would be crushing.
For centuries, Greek writers told stories about the Amazons, warrior women from the East, women who removed their right breast to shoot bows better, women who killed men and lived apart from society. Scholars dismissed it as mythology, fantasy, misogyny even, men inventing terrifying women to justify keeping real women powerless. Then archaeologists started opening Sarmatian graves, and they found women buried in full battle array, not ceremonially, actually used armor, actually used weapons, bones showing healed combat injuries, arrow wounds, sword cuts. One tomb contained a woman buried with 32 arrowheads, not arrows, arrowheads, just the tips. Historians think these were her kills, her trophies, each one removed from an enemy she'd shot down. The Amazon wasn't a myth. She was a Sarmatian. Now, let's think about this from a military perspective. You're a Roman commander. You're facing a Sarmatian army of, let's say, 10,000 riders. In a Roman army of 10,000, maybe 8,000 are actual combat troops. The rest are support, engineers, supply, medical, command staff.
In that Sarmatian army, all 10,000 can fight. There is no supply train. They bring their families, their herds. The support staff can also kill you from 100 yards away. But here's where it gets worse. About 3,000 of those riders are women. And they're not less skilled. They're not good enough for steppe warriors. They've proven themselves. They've passed a test that many couldn't pass. They've killed in the chaos of battle and earned their place. That's not a 10,000-person army. That's 10,000 proven killers with nothing behind them but more killers.
The Sarmatians perfected something the Scythians had invented, the feigned retreat. Here's how it works. You're facing them in battle. They engage you, skirmish, shoot some arrows, nothing too serious. Then suddenly, they break, they run. It looks chaotic, panicked even. Your commander screams, "Don't pursue, it's a trap." But you've been marching for weeks, you're exhausted, you're terrified, and suddenly the enemy that's haunted your nightmares is running away. Your line breaks, you pursue. It feels like victory. You run 200 yards, 400 yards. They're still running. Maybe it's real this time. Maybe they really are fleeing. Then, at some invisible signal, maybe a horn, maybe just experience, every single rider turns in their saddle, at full gallop, moving away from you at 30 miles per hour. And they shoot backwards, over the horse's hindquarters. The Parthian shot, named after another steppe tribe who used it. But the Sarmatians perfected it. Roman chroniclers write about men being shot between the eyes while pursuing fleeing Sarmatians at full gallop, target and archer moving in opposite directions. That's not luck. That's a culture that puts you on a horse before you can walk and doesn't let you stop until you're superhuman. Pause. They opened one tomb on the Russian steppe. Inside, they found a prince, Mongolian features, dark hair, clear Asiatic ancestry. Buried next to him was his queen, blonde hair, Nordic features, tall bone structure. She could have passed for Swedish. They'd been married, ruled together, died together, or close enough that they were buried together. Think about the journey that represents. Somewhere in the chaos of the steppe, a Mongolian prince and a Caucasian woman from thousands of miles away met, married, created a hybrid kingdom. Their children would have been something new, a blend of East and West that only existed on the steppe. And this wasn't rare, this was constant. The steppe was a mixing bowl. Every defeated tribe was absorbed. Every marriage created new combinations. Turkic peoples, Mongolian peoples, Indo-European peoples, all intermarrying, all creating new tribes. That's why you'd find blonde-haired Turks, red-haired Mongols, green-eyed warriors on the Chinese border. The steppe wasn't just producing warriors, it was producing entirely new ethnicities every few generations. Pause. Now, if you're thinking the Sarmatians sound terrifying, women warriors, perfect horse archery, unbeatable tactics, just wait. Because the tribe that's coming next, they made the Sarmatians pack up and leave. They scared Rome so badly that Romans started calling them demons. They had skulls that looked alien. Hit that like and subscribe button, because we're about to meet the Huns.
370 A.D. The Gothic peoples, Germanic tribes living north of the Roman Empire, are relatively stable. They're fierce warriors themselves. They've fought Rome to a standstill multiple times. They're not scared of much. Then, refugees start arriving from the east. They're terrified, traumatized. They tell stories that don't make sense. Stories about demons, about creatures that aren't fully human. The Goths don't believe them. Then they see what's chasing the refugees. Imagine you're a Gothic warrior. You've never left Europe. You've never seen an Asian person. You've certainly never seen anything like this. Squat, bow-legged riders, but their heads are wrong. Elongated skulls that stretch back behind their heads like they're from another planet. Faces covered in ritual scars. Eyes that are slits. Flat, wide noses. This is your first contact with a different race, and they look like aliens. The Huns practiced something called cranial deformation. When a baby was born, the mother would bind the infant's skull with tight wrappings. As the child grew, the skull would grow into this elongated, distorted shape. Why? Nobody knows for certain. Maybe it was beauty. Maybe it was tribal identification. Maybe it was to look more terrifying. It worked. The Huns had another custom that Roman chroniclers found horrifying. They would cut their children's faces at a very young age, deep cuts across the cheeks. The wounds would scar, badly. But that was the point. The scars prevented beards from growing. A Hun warrior would have a face full of scar tissue instead of facial hair. Again, why? Some historians think it was so they could draw their bowstrings back further without facial hair getting in the way. Others think it was purely aesthetic. But imagine being that child, 5, 6 years old. Your father holds you down, takes a knife, cuts your face. You're screaming, bleeding, and everyone's proud of you. This is your initiation into Hun society. Pain, scars, becoming something other than what nature intended.
Now, every steppe tribe was good with horses, but the Huns took it further than anyone before them. Roman writers claimed the Huns could barely walk. They were so bow-legged from constant riding that on foot they were clumsy, awkward. But on horseback, they were unstoppable. They put infants on horses the moment they could sit up. Before they could walk, they were riding. They ate in the saddle. There are accounts of Huns sleeping on horseback during long rides. One Roman writer, I think it was Ammianus Marcellinus, wrote that the Huns looked like they were nailed to their horses. He meant it literally. They moved together like a single organism. Here's a detail that's almost absurd, but tells you everything. Roman sources claim the Huns would put raw meat under their saddles while riding. The constant friction, the heat from the horse, the pressure from the rider's weight, it would cook the meat, or at least tenderize it enough to eat. Whether this is true or exaggerated, the fact that Romans believed it tells you what they thought about the Huns. These are people who never dismount, not to eat, not to sleep, not for anything. The Hun bow was a composite bow, layers of wood, sinew, and horn glued together. It took years to make, some sources say 10 years. It was so hard to pull back that most men couldn't do it once. But Hun warriors, they could fire it dozens of times, accurately, at full gallop. Range? Up to 500 yards maximum distance. Effective killing range was probably 100 to 200 yards. For context, a Roman pilum, their throwing spear, had a range of maybe 30 yards. You could be getting massacred and not even be close enough to fight back. But here's what made the Hun bow truly terrifying. They were ambidextrous. They could shoot with either hand equally well. And they'd practiced the Parthian shot, shooting backwards over the horse's rump while galloping away, so much that they could hit a pursuing enemy between the eyes, according to chroniclers. Between the eyes, while galloping at 30 miles per hour, target also moving backwards over the horse. We will never see that level of skill again. It's an extinct human capability. The Huns didn't invent the feigned retreat. The Scythians did. The Sarmatians perfected it. But the Huns made it an art form. Here's how you die against the Huns. They appear on the horizon, maybe 5,000 riders. Your Roman legion, well-trained, disciplined, forms up, shields locked, ready. The Huns charge. You brace for impact. At 100 yards, they release a volley of arrows. Hundreds of men in your formation drop. Then the Huns wheel around and gallop away. They don't close. They don't engage. They just leave. Your commander knows it's a trap. He's read the reports. He knows about the feigned retreat. He orders, hold formation, do not pursue. But then they come back and shoot again. More men drop and leave again. This goes on for hours. Your formation is getting shredded. Morale is breaking. Men are dying, and you haven't swung a sword once. Eventually, inevitably, someone breaks. One unit pursues, then another, then your whole line is chasing them. The Huns split into groups. Some keep running, some circle back, some hide behind hills. Your formation is scattered now, exhausted, disorganized. That's when the Huns turn around, and that's when you die. There's a letter from a Roman official written in the 440s describing the aftermath of a Hun raid. He talks about walking through a village. Everyone's dead, but the bodies are strange. No sword wounds, no signs of close combat, just arrows. Dozens of arrows per body. Some people had been shot from 200+ yards away while trying to run. He wrote, "They kill from distances we cannot comprehend. It's as if death falls from the sky." That's what it felt like to face the Huns. Impersonal, distant, inevitable. Now here's the truly crazy part. The Huns weren't even the strongest tribe on the steppe. They were running from stronger tribes behind them. Think of the steppe like dominoes. A new, terrifying tribe emerges in Inner Mongolia, that womb of nations, as chroniclers called it. They defeat their neighbors. Those neighbors flee west. They crash into the next tribe over, who flee west, who crash into the next tribe. The Huns were maybe the fourth or fifth domino in that chain. And when they crashed into the Goths had nowhere to run except into Roman territory. The Romans said no. The Goths forced their way in anyway. The Battle of Adrianople, 378 AD. Rome loses. The Emperor Valens dies on the battlefield. 410 AD. The Goths sack Rome itself. The eternal city, undefeated for 800 years, falls. And you can trace it all back to Inner Mongolia, to some tribe nobody in Europe had ever heard of, defeating another tribe who fled west, who pushed the Huns, who pushed the Goths, who destroyed Rome. And then came Attila of the Huns. Even his name sounds like violence. He united the Hun tribes, something rarely done on the steppe, created an actual empire, invaded Gaul, invaded Italy, held the Western Roman Empire hostage. Roman sources called him the scourge of God, God's punishment for Rome's sins. Pope Leo I, the Pope himself, had to meet Attila personally to beg him not to sack Rome. And Attila turned around, left. Nobody knows why. Maybe he was paid off. Maybe his army was exhausted. Maybe disease was spreading. Or maybe he just enjoyed the power of saying no, of holding the greatest city in the world in his hand and choosing not to crush it, just to prove he could. And then Attila died, 453 AD, on his wedding night, they say, either from a nosebleed or alcohol poisoning or murdered by his new wife. Nobody's sure. And the Hun Empire collapsed almost immediately. Without Attila, the tribes broke apart, fought each other, disappeared back into the steppe, or were absorbed by other peoples. Within a generation, the Huns, who had terrified all of Europe, were basically gone. But Rome never recovered. The Western Roman Empire fell in 476 AD, 23 years after Attila died.
The Huns didn't destroy Rome directly. They just broke something, some fundamental belief that Rome was eternal, untouchable. Once that belief was gone, the empire followed. So, that's the Huns. Cranial deformation, ritual scars, horse-human hybrids, impossible archery, and the end of Rome. And they're only number 3 on this list. If you want to see what could possibly be worse than that, you need to subscribe, because number 2 was a multi-century empire that triggered the Crusades. And number 1, they killed so many people that the global carbon dioxide levels dropped. The climate changed because of how many people they killed. Let's meet them.
After the Huns collapsed, you'd think Europe would breathe a sigh of relief. The nightmare was over. But the steppe wasn't done. It was never done. New tribes kept emerging from that same region in Inner Mongolia, that womb of nations that just kept producing new and more terrifying peoples. The next major wave? The Turks. Now, when I say Turks, you're probably picturing people from modern Turkey, dark hair, Mediterranean features, Middle Eastern culture. But the early Turkic peoples, some of them had blonde hair, blue eyes, Caucasian features. The steppe wasn't just a place, it was a genetic mixing bowl that created ethnicities that shouldn't exist according to our modern understanding of race and geography. Here's what made the Turks different from everyone who came before. They didn't just raid, they didn't just terrify, they didn't collapse after one great leader died. They stayed. The Scythians were pushed west and eventually absorbed. The Huns fell apart without Attila. The Sarmatians faded into other tribes. But the Turks, they built empires, plural, empires that lasted centuries. Let me tell you about the Turkish bow, because this is where we see evolution in action. The Scythians had invented the composite bow around 1000 BC, layers of wood, sinew, horn, revolutionary weapon. The Huns improved it, made it smaller, more powerful. But the Turks, they perfected it. The Turkish bow was the pinnacle of pre-gunpowder ranged weapons. It could be drawn to the chest, the jaw, or behind the ear for maximum power. Some Turkish bows could reach 800 yards. 800 yards! That's half a mile.
1071, the Battle of Manzikert. The Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, the half that didn't fall, has survived for 700 years after Rome fell. They're the shield protecting Europe from everything the East can throw at them. They face the Seljuk Turks, led by Alp Arslan, which translates to heroic lion, because of course it does. The Byzantines have 40,000 to 50,000 men, professional army, heavy cavalry, the best troops they can field. The Turks, maybe 20,000, all horse archers. The battle lasts all day. The Turks use the same tactics we've seen before: skirmish, retreat, the feigned flight. But the Byzantines know about this. They've read the histories. They've prepared. Doesn't matter. By nightfall, the Byzantine army is destroyed. The emperor himself, Emperor Romanos IV, is captured, the first Byzantine emperor captured in battle in the empire's history. Now here's why this battle matters. The Byzantines were Europe's early warning system. They were the shield. They kept the steppe tribes from pouring into the Mediterranean, into Italy, into Western Europe. After Manzikert, that shield was broken. The Byzantines sent desperate messages to Western Europe. Help us, please, send armies, send knights, send anything. Western Europe's response was slow, took 25 years, but eventually they responded with the Crusades. The Crusades, 2 centuries of religious warfare, millions dead, cultural wounds that still haven't healed, happened because the Turks broke the Byzantine army at Manzikert. Think about that chain of causation. A tribal confederation in Mongolia defeats their neighbors. Those neighbors flee west. Eventually, the Turks emerge. They defeat Byzantium. Byzantium calls for help. Europe sends the Crusades. One battle in eastern Turkey changes world history for the next 200 years. But here's what really makes the Turks unique. After Manzikert, they didn't leave, they didn't collapse, they built. The Seljuk Empire, then the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans conquered Constantinople in 1453, the city that had stood for over 1,000 years, made it Istanbul. They ruled the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe for 600 years. 600 years! That's not a raid. That's not a flash of terror that disappears. That's a permanent reshaping of human civilization. You know what the crazy part is? The Turks managed something no other steppe people ever did. They transitioned. They went from terrifying horse archers that settled peoples feared to settled peoples themselves. They built cities. They created architecture. They wrote poetry. They made art. The Blue Mosque in Istanbul, the Topkapi Palace, Ottoman miniature paintings. This was all created by descendants of steppe nomads. It's like if the Huns had conquered Rome, and then 300 years later their descendants were building the Sistine Chapel. And here's the thing, there's still a country called Turkey, right now, today. No one calls their country Scythia. There's no nation of Hunland. The Sarmatians are gone, but Turkey exists. Because the Turks didn't just conquer, they transformed. They became something new while keeping their roots. That's not just military success, that's cultural evolution in real time. So that's the Turks, the tribe that broke Byzantium, triggered the Crusades, and built an empire that lasted longer than most civilizations exist. And they're number 2. If you're wondering, could possibly top that, what tribe could be more impactful than the one that shaped the entire Middle East and triggered centuries of religious warfare? You need to stay watching. Because number 1, they conquered more territory than anyone in human history. They killed so many people that forests grew back over farmland and the earth's atmosphere changed. They made the Turks look peaceful by comparison. Let's meet the Mongols.
We're back in Baghdad, 1258. 6 days of slaughter, 800,000 dead, rivers running black with ink, then red with blood. Every cat killed. Let me tell you how we got here. 1241 AD, 2 battles happen on the same day, different hemispheres. In Poland, at the Battle of Legnica, Mongol forces annihilate a combined army of Poles, Germans, and Teutonic Knights. Knights, Europe's elite warriors, trained from birth, armor worth a year's income, are slaughtered like cattle. That same day, in Korea, Mongol forces are fighting Japanese samurai who have invaded the peninsula. The Teutonic Knights and the Japanese samurai, 2 of history's most legendary warrior classes, have absolutely no idea the other exists. But the Mongols are fighting both of them simultaneously on opposite sides of the world. That's the scale we're talking about. That's the Mongol Empire at its height. The largest contiguous land empire in human history, ever. 12 million square miles, from Korea to Poland, from Siberia to Vietnam. But here's what gets me. It all started with one man, Temujin, born around 1262. His father was poisoned when Temujin was 9. His tribe abandoned him, left him, his mother, and his siblings to die on the steppe. Most kids in that situation, they die. That's it. Story over. Temujin survived, killed his half-brother in an argument over food, was captured by a rival tribe and enslaved, escaped, built alliances, started gathering followers. By 1206, he'd united the Mongolian tribes, something that had never been done successfully. They gave him a new name, Genghis Khan, universal ruler. He was probably in his 40s. Most conquerors start young. Alexander was 20, Napoleon was 26. Genghis was middle-aged, had lived a hard life, had been betrayed, enslaved, starved, left for dead, and he was about to change the world forever. Let's talk about the Mongol bow, because this is where 2,000 years of steppe evolution culminates.
The Mongol composite bow took 10 years to make, layers of wood, horn, and sinew, curved when unstrung, meaning you had to bend it backwards just to string it. Most people couldn't draw it once. The draw weight was somewhere between 100 and 160 pounds. For context, medieval English longbows, legendary weapons, were about 80 to 90 pounds. The Mongols started training with them before they could properly walk. Maximum range, 500 yards, 5 football fields. But that's not the effective range. That's just how far the arrow could physically travel. Effective killing range, 200 to 300 yards. You could be shot dead from 3 football fields away by a man on horseback at full gallop. And here's the detail that should terrify you. Mongol warriors carried 2 bows and about 60 arrows each. That's standard loadout. They could fire 12 arrows per minute, sustained rate. Do the math. A Mongol force of 10,000 riders could put 120,000 arrows in the air every minute. But it's not just the bow, it's the training. Mongol children were put on horses at age 3. By age 5, they were riding independently. By age 10, they were hunting. By age 15, they were warriors. And here's the part that made them unstoppable. They practiced a form of warfare that was also their entire lifestyle. Hunting on horseback with bows is exactly the same skill set as warfare. So when they weren't fighting, they were practicing. When they weren't practicing, they were hunting, which is practicing. Every Mongol warrior had thousands of hours of real experience shooting from horseback before their first battle. Compare that to a medieval European knight, trained from childhood, yes, but training with a sword on foot, jousting, some archery. They were good. But a Mongol warrior had more combat-applicable skills at age 15 than most knights accumulated in a lifetime.
Now, the Mongols didn't just fight, they engineered warfare. Standard Mongol tactics went like this. First, spies. The Mongols had an intelligence network that wouldn't be matched until the modern era. They knew everything about their enemies before they arrived. Defenses, troop strength, supply lines, political divisions. Second, psychological warfare. They'd send envoys, surrender now, open your gates, you'll be spared, your lives will continue normally. If you surrendered, sometimes, they'd keep their word. You'd pay tribute, provide soldiers, and be left alone. If you resisted, that's when the terror started. The city of Nishapur in Persia. Mongol forces lay siege. The governor's wife, Toka's Khatun, Genghis Khan's daughter, is there. Her husband, Genghis's favorite son-in-law, is killed by an arrow from the city walls. The city eventually falls. Genghis's daughter orders the execution of every living thing. Not just the soldiers, not just the men, everyone, women, children, dogs, cats, livestock. Then she orders the city destroyed, every building, every wall, every foundation. Then, and this is the part that haunts me, she orders the ground plowed like a field. They literally plowed the city under. Then they built a pyramid of skulls, stacked human skulls in a pyramid so other cities could see what happened when you killed a Mongol prince. The message was clear. You don't get to win even once. You don't get to kill even one Mongol important without paying in full. But here's what people don't understand about the Mongols. They weren't just brutal. They were sophisticated. They had the fastest communication system in the world, the Yam system. Relay stations with fresh horses every 25 miles. Messages could travel 200 miles in a day. That's faster than anything in Europe until the telegraph. They had siege engineers, captured Chinese and Persian experts who could build trebuchets, siege towers, explosives. The Mongols learned from everyone they conquered. They had a merit-based military. Didn't matter if you were noble-born or a shepherd, you advanced based on ability. That was revolutionary. They were religiously tolerant. Genghis's empire included Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, shamanists. Didn't matter. As long as you obeyed and paid taxes, believe what you want.
This wasn't a horde of barbarians. This was an empire that functioned better than most settled civilizations.
But when they wanted to be brutal, no one could match them. 13th century chroniclers talk about cities where the Mongols killed everyone, then sent soldiers back through days later to kill anyone who'd been hiding or playing dead. They talk about people being forced to execute their own family members before being killed themselves. They talk about dams being destroyed to flood entire regions. The death toll is almost incomprehensible. Estimates vary wildly, but somewhere between 30 and 40 million people died during the Mongol conquests, in a world with a total population of maybe 400 million. That's 10% of humanity gone. And here's the absolutely insane part. Scientists can measure the Mongol conquests in ice cores. Ice cores from Antarctica, from Greenland. They show a drop in carbon dioxide levels in the 13th century, a measurable drop. Why? Because the Mongols killed so many people that farmland went back to forest. Enough farmland returning to forest to change the atmosphere. You can see the Mongol conquests from space centuries later in ice samples from the poles. That's not just warfare, that's geological impact. Back to Baghdad, 1258, the House of Wisdom. This was the greatest library in the world. Thousands of manuscripts, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, poetry, philosophy, copies of works that existed nowhere else. The Mongols threw them in the Tigris River. So many books that chroniclers said you could walk across the river on books without getting your feet wet. 1,000 years of accumulated knowledge gone in 6 days. And here's the thing that makes me physically ill. We don't know what we lost. We know some titles, some authors, but most of it vanished forever. How many medical discoveries, how many mathematical proofs, how many stories, poems, philosophical insights, gone because Genghis Khan's grandson was angry. After Genghis died in 1227, the empire split. His sons and grandsons divided it. The Golden Horde in Russia, they ruled for 200 years. Russian history, even today, is shaped by the Mongol occupation, the centralized autocracy, the brutal efficiency. That's the Mongol legacy. The Ilkhanate in Persia, they ruled for 80 years, eventually converted to Islam, were absorbed into Persian culture. The Yuan dynasty in China, Kublai Khan, Genghis's grandson, became emperor of China. The barbarians didn't just invade China, they became China. And the empire in Mongolia itself, which continued producing conquerors, Tamerlane in the 14th century, the Mongols in India. The Mongols understood something that most militaries don't. Sometimes the most effective warfare is the warfare you don't have to fight. Terror is a force multiplier, and nothing creates terror like absolute, total, incomprehensible brutality. So, there they are, the 5 most terrifying tribes from the steppe. The Scythians, who started it all, skull cups, frozen tombs, the birth of the horse archer. The Sarmatians, where death could be a woman and every warrior had earned their place in blood. The Huns, who broke Rome, who looked like aliens, who moved like demons. The Turks, who built an empire that lasted 600 years, who transformed from terrifying nomads to sophisticated rulers. And the Mongols, the peak, the culmination of 2,000 years of evolution, the greatest army that ever existed, the most brutal, the most effective, the most terrifying. They're gone now. The age of the horse archer is over. But their legacy? It shaped Russia. It shaped the Middle East. It shaped China. It triggered the Crusades. It ended Rome. It changed the climate. The steppe peoples, these aliens from Inner Asia, didn't just raid civilization, they created it, they shaped it, they forced it to evolve or die. And we're living in the world they made. If this video changed how you see history, if you're sitting there realizing that the Mongols are why Russia is the way it is, why the Middle East developed the way it did, why we have the world we have, then you need to subscribe right now, because there are so many more stories like this, histories that sound like fantasy but are brutally, terrifyingly real. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, drop a comment. Which tribe would you least want to face in battle? And remember, your ancestors survived these people. That's the only reason you exist. Think about that. Thanks for watching.